Welcome to the preview of Decision Day 2020 in MLS. And what I'm going to do with the preview of all these Decision Day games is that I'm going to split into two parts, where in part number one, which I'm going to do today, is to look at the Eastern Conference game of Decision Day, and tomorrow I will look at the Western Conference game that's going to be on Decision Day. And there is no doubt that in the Eastern Conference, there's definitely a lot of decision that is still to make, and there's going to be definitely a lot more chaotic thing that's going to be happening in the Eastern Conference compared to what we're going to see in the Western Conference, where the Western Conference, it's pretty much all settled with just a couple of seedings that still needs to kind of be in place, and also the top spot in the Western Conference. Whereas in the Eastern Conference, we have the battle of the Supporters' Shield between Toronto and Philly. We have battle for the last home field advantage spot in the fourth position. We have the battle for the crucial sixth position to play in the play-in round in the Eastern Conference. And most importantly, we have 5 teams battling for the last 2 spots of the Eastern Conference playoffs. So yeah, things are definitely going to get very chaotic in terms of the Eastern Conference, which that's exactly what I like, because I always love chaos that happens on Decision Day. But the first game we're going to talk about is Chicago versus NYCFC. And by the way, I did not put the time for all the Eastern Conference games, because all of these Eastern Conference games is going to kick off at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Pacific. So there's really no point writing that pretty much the same way for all 7 of these games that is going to take place. But yeah, the first game is between Chicago versus NYCFC, and obviously there is playoff implication, and the last spot to at least guarantee you host one game at home in the Eastern Conference playoff is at stake. For Chicago, all they need is that if they can win this game against NYCFC, they basically book their ticket into the playoffs this season. Now, if they do tie against NYCFC, they need to rely on Atlanta to either lose or tie against Columbus, and Miami to lose or tie against FC Cincinnati. Or if they in case did lose to NYCFC in this game, then they really need to rely on Atlanta to lose against Columbus, Miami to lose or tie against FC Cincinnati, and DC United to lose or tie versus Montreal. But obviously the easiest path for Chicago to get into the playoffs is to get a win against NYCFC, which is not going to be very easy, because this is an NYCFC team that is definitely feeling the momentum and definitely will be on a very high note coming into this game after that 5-2 win at home in the New York Derby. And they also have home field advantage that they're looking to chase, as they're looking to try to get the 4th spot in the Eastern Conference if they can win this game, and hopefully Columbus will lose or tie against Atlanta to be able to get that spot. So yeah, there's definitely a lot at stake in terms of seeding and playoff implication in this one. And by the way, I'm not going to put the prediction box for the Decision Day in terms of the preview, because I want to just, these games are going to be really unpredictable, and that there's going to be some of these games where there's so much at stake. You can definitely see both teams is going to be fighting for a win, and that we have seen before where on Decision Day there sometimes could be some very unexpected result that if you predicted the fact that of course is the case, and it turns out that exactly wasn't the case. So yeah, this should be a very interesting game, and that for Chicago, obviously they would love to try to just win and don't have to rely on other team, and especially the fact that they have come so far now, the fact that if they do not make the playoffs, this will be very disappointed, and they're going to always look back of all those games that they missed those chances in terms of dropping those crucial points, and how if they didn't drop those crucial points in this season, they probably wouldn't be in this spot right now. Now have to, of course, potentially get a win, or maybe rely on other team to get themselves into the playoffs. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is Columbus and Atlanta. So Columbus is 11-5-6, and Atlanta is 6-4-12, and this is another game where basically one team is fighting for their playoff lives, while the other is fighting to try to keep their 4th and crucial spot as the last spot in terms of at least hosting one home game in the Eastern Conference playoff. For Atlanta, they of course will need some help, even if they are going to win this game. They of course win against Columbus, and they need to, of course, rely on Montreal to lose or tie versus DC United. Now, if they do win against Columbus, they can also rely on Chicago to lose or tie against NYCFC. And that if they, in case, did tie with Columbus, then they definitely need a lot of help. They need to rely on Chicago to lose against NYCFC, Miami to lose or tie against FC Cincinnati, and DC United to lose or tie against Montreal. Now, for Columbus, they can maintain that 4th position as long as if they can get a win in this game, or NYCFC draw or loss versus the Chicago Fire. And I have a feeling there's no way that Caleb Porter is going to rest his guys coming into this game. I mean, I know this is the 3rd game in 7 days for them, and you would think maybe they could maybe think about resting some of their guys heading into the playoffs. I think he's going to once again go with the strongest 11, and knowing the fact that I think if you talk about who needs this 4th spot and who needs to at least have one home game in the Eastern Conference playoff between Columbus and NYCFC, it's got to be Columbus, because they still have not won a road game so far this season, and knowing the fact that if they do have to go on the road in the first round, that could be an early exit, knowing how much they really struggled this season at home, and that, you know, or struggle this season on the road. But at home, they definitely are much better this season, although they are going to be facing against an Atlanta team that, yes, you know, in the last couple of games it hasn't really gone very well, but that last game where they won 2-0 against FC Cincinnati, hopefully that will give them a lot of confidence coming into this one, where they can, of course, able to knock down Columbus, that is definitely not in the best form right now. So yeah, this should be a very interesting kind of game. But moving on into the next match is DC versus Montreal. Now, notice I didn't put anything on the board, and the reason why I didn't put anything on the board in this game is that I'm going to read you the playoff implication, because there was so much scenarios that both of these teams could potentially clinch their playoff spot that I just couldn't fit on the board, and therefore there's a large blank area in there. So as I'm going to kind of just look at here on the MLS app, let's see, there we go. So for Montreal, they of course will clinch a berth in the Audi 2020 MLS Cup playoffs if they of course win against DC United. So that's the simplest way for them to win against DC, and they basically will clinch their position. Now, if they do tie against DC United, they need to rely on Chicago to lose or tie versus NYCFC, and Atlanta to lose or tie versus Columbus. Another way is that if they do tie with DC United, they need to rely on Atlanta to lose or tie against Columbus, and Miami to lose or tie versus FC Cincinnati. Now, if they do once again tie with DC United, they can also rely on Chicago to lose or tie versus NYCFC, and Miami to lose or tie versus FC Cincinnati. But in case if they do lose this game to DC United, they can still get in if Chicago does lose to NYCFC, and Atlanta is able to lose or tie versus Columbus, and Miami is able to lose or tie versus FC Cincinnati. Whereas for DC United, they simply need to win this game. If they do not win this game, they're going to be eliminated. But they also need to rely on other teams' help. First, they need to rely on either Chicago to lose or tie versus NYCFC, and Atlanta to lose or tie versus Columbus. The other way is that if Chicago does lose or tie versus NYCFC, and Miami is able to lose or tie versus FC Cincinnati, then DC, of course, can't make the playoffs as they win against Montreal. And then the third way is that if Atlanta lose or tie versus Columbus, and Miami lose or tie against FC Cincinnati, and DC is able to get the 3 points against Montreal, that is the third way in terms of them making the playoffs. So, yeah, you know, I said it before, this is a game that one of these teams, whoever is going to win, most likely is going to potentially get into the playoffs. Although, reading those playoff scenarios, there could be a slight chance that even if DC is able to win this game and the other resort doesn't go in favor of them, both of these teams could actually get themselves eliminated heading into this one. And hence, I'm actually surprised this was not picked as the game to be national televised. If you guys don't know, there's going to be 2 games that is nationally televised on Decision Day. One, of course, is on ESPN, and the other one is going to be on FS1. Well, actually, one of them is going to be on ABC, and that one is actually the one of the one of the Supporters Shield kind of decider between New England versus Philly. But I thought this one could have been a good shout in terms of it to be on national television, because of the fact that, you know, the winner of this game most likely could potentially get themselves into the playoffs. But either way, also looking at those scenarios, there's no doubt that DC is going to be the team that has the more pressure, and that they definitely are going to be the one that I think they're going to try to be on the front foot and try to win this game. Whereas for Montreal, they're probably just going to sit back a little bit and try to maybe get a draw or even get a win in this game to basically clinch themselves into the playoffs. I mean, they're still in a very good position in terms of clinching themselves in the playoffs, and they don't necessarily need to win this game to clinch the playoffs, but they also do need to rely on other teams' help if they, of course, are going to do that. And also, unlike DC's case, for Montreal, if they do win against DC United, then they basically book themselves into the playoffs without having to rely on other teams that actually kind of help them out. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is none other than Miami versus FC Cincinnati. So there's no doubt that out of all those 5 teams that is fighting for those last 2 spots of the playoffs, Inter Miami has the easiest team to face. I mean, FC Cincinnati is already eliminated for the playoffs, and they're the only team that isn't really in this scenario where they have a lot to fight for, and that, yeah, the only thing they might have to fight for is the wooden spoon, which I think they already have won that too, so they don't really have a lot to fight for, other than the fact that they do have a chance to spoil Miami chance to make the playoffs. And Miami, you know, they technically have a relatively decent path to actually make it to the playoffs, although they do still need to rely on a lot of teams' help. First of all, they of course need to win against FC Cincinnati, and there's actually 3 ways that they can get to the playoffs if they can win against FC Cincinnati and rely on other teams' help. If Montreal do lose or tie versus DC United, and Chicago is able to lose or tie versus NYCFC, they of course will make the playoffs. Now, if Montreal does lose or tie versus DC United, and Atlanta is able to lose or tie versus Columbus, they also get themselves into the playoffs. And then the other way is that if Chicago is able to lose or tie versus NYCFC, and Atlanta is able to lose or tie versus Columbus, then that is another way for them to, of course, make it to the playoffs. So the path isn't really as hard it is, and, you know, I would say that the only thing that makes it hard is because they need to at least rely on 2 teams to either lose or tie and have some games that is in favor. But either way, at the end of the day, they need to win this game against FC Cincinnati, and there's just no doubt that if they do not win this game against FC Cincinnati, not only the fact that they'll be eliminated from the playoffs, but they probably don't deserve to make the playoffs if you're not going to beat the worst team in the league at home. And, you know, I know Miami this season has been kind of inconsistent, but this has got to be a gimmick for them, and that this has got to be a game that they know that the pressure is definitely going to be on them. But knowing the fact that they have probably the easiest game out of all the other team, it would definitely be a little bit embarrassing if they aren't able to get this result against FC Cincinnati, especially at home that this game is going to be played. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be the Redbulls versus Toronto. So the Redbulls, you know, they are coming into this game still trying to get that 6th seed to avoid to play in the play-in round, but they do need to have a win in this game and hope that New England does lose to Philly to get the 6th seed. And in some way, the Redbulls have a lot of telling story in terms of the supporter shield, because if they do win against Toronto, then they basically just handed Philly the supporter shield. Because for TFC, they of course have 2 ways in terms of clinching the supporter shield. They win this game against the Redbulls, and Philly is able to lose or tie against the Revs, then they of course would be crowned supporter shield. Now, the other way to do it is that if they do tie against the Redbulls and somehow Philly does lose to New England, they will also basically crown supporter shield. But either way, you know, certainly coming into this final day, both of these 2 teams that's battling for supporter shield is tied with each other, with Philly has the advantage on goal differential, and for Toronto, they're just gonna hope that they can of course win this game and hope that New England can kind of help them out in terms of crowning themselves in terms of supporter shield. But obviously, as I said, the Redbulls, they still have something to play for, and they do not want to have to go through that playing rounds to have to play against a team that the Redbulls, even though they're gonna get home field advantage in the playing rounds most likely. Yeah, home games this season for the Redbulls hasn't relatively been kind to them, and that they have dropped some result that they should have won at home so far this season. So it's gonna be very unpredictable if they do go into the playing rounds, and that they would definitely want to try to avoid playing in the play-in rounds if they can, of course, win this game and hope that New England is able to lose against Philly in that one. But yeah, moving on into the last game on this board before talk about the last game that is the national televised game between Philly and New England is Orlando and Nashville. Now, this game, technically, there isn't really a lot to play for, and probably one of the more irrelevant game in the Eastern Conference, because for Orlando, they don't really have anything to play for in this game because they cannot catch Philly and Toronto in terms of getting at least in the top 2 spot, and they can, of course, fall out of at least not having one game that is going to be a home game in the Eastern Conference playoffs. So technically, I think Oscar Pereira potentially is going to maybe just play the reserve team in this one. Although I think you could say that the only thing that they might need to fight for is the Nani red card situation. Orlando did appeal to MLS in terms of the red card that Nani got, and I would be shocked if they do not resent that. And, again, going back to that play, as I said before, I really think that is not a red card, and it seemed like from what I heard from other people and also some of the MLS expert, they said that it wasn't a red card too. So yeah, I feel like hopefully MLS Disco would actually do the right thing and potentially resend that. I mean, even if they don't reset the red card and that Nani isn't able to play this game, again, since this is kind of a meaningless game for Orlando, it doesn't really matter if they, of course, are able to have Nani for this game or not. But just for the integrity of the league, and just for the fact that, just admit that VAR got that call actually wrong, and us not continue to kind of question the usage of VAR in this league, do the right thing and actually reset that red card that should have never been a red card during that incident. Now, for Nashville, the only thing that they, of course, have to play for is that they can technically still get into that 6th and final spot to avoid in the play-in round, but they definitely need a lot of help. First of all, they need to win this game, and that they also have to rely on the Redbulls and New England to lose. But obviously, I think they'll probably will just be happy in terms of being in the playoffs, and wonder if they are going to be in the play-in round or not. Like, if they are going to be in the play-in round, I don't think it's going to be a bit of a problem, because whoever they're going to be facing is going to have a very big headache facing this Nashville team, that we know that this is a team that as I said before, you do not want to play this team in the playoffs. They're going to frustrate you on the attacking end, and somehow, in some way, they will find a way to score a goal, whether it's in a chaotic moment or on the set piece, to basically move on into the next round. So yeah, even though this is kind of a irrelevant game for both of these teams, and that Nashville only have an outside chance of getting that 6th spot, we shall see how this game, of course, will be played. But that being said, I'm now going to switch board one more time to look at the national televised game that's going to be on NBC. Or not NBC, but ABC, that is. I don't know why I said NBC there. This probably maybe because I might have kept track of the presidential election a little bit, and I kind of mixed up with watching both of those networks. But either way, we're going to switch the boards and look at the last game that is going to be national televised between Philly and New England. So here we are, the last game on this board, and the last game to talk about in terms of Decision Day in the Eastern Conference is the Union against New England. So Philly, of course, as I mentioned, they can, of course, clinch the Supporters' Shield if they, of course, win or tie against New England, and Toronto is able to lose or tie versus the Redbulls, and that there's actually another way that they can, of course, win the Supporters' Shield, and all they need to do is just win against New England, and it doesn't really matter what Toronto does. But for New England, they, of course, all they need is to just get a draw in this game, and that they, of course, will be avoided to play in the play-in rounds, although there's another ways that they can, of course, do that and that is if they do lose this game in the hands of the Union, they would hope that the Redbulls would tie or lose in that game against Toronto, and Nashville will also lose or tie against Orlando and able to have to play in the play-in round and get their 6th seed. But either way, this is definitely a big game coming up for both of these teams. Probably even a bigger game for the Union, knowing the fact that I think if you want to ask me, those two teams that's battling for Supporters' Shield, who actually has the more pressure coming into this week, and who actually is the one that needs to win the Supporters' Shield more than the other? I gotta say the Union. I mean, especially how just last week they were in such a good position in terms of clinching themselves in the Supporters' Shield, and we've seen this story before with the Philadelphia Union, where they came so close of winning a trophy, been into 3 U.S. Open Cup final, only to lose all 3 of them, and now they're in a position once again to win a trophy and win a Supporters' Shield, and yet somehow in some way they are now on the brinks of this situation where if they do not win this game, or if they do tie in this game and that Toronto is able to win that one to leapfrog them on the very final day, you're going to say that this is going to be another classic disappointment for the Union and another missed opportunity for them to grab a trophy. So if they want to kind of reverse the narrative of the past Union team to not able to get the job done in terms of getting a trophy, they need to of course win this game and grab the Supporters' Shield and hopefully not choke right at the end to lose the Supporters' Shield on the very final day to Toronto FC. But either way, let me know in the comments below what do you think of these 7 games, and as always, let me know in the comments below your prediction for these 7 games and who actually is going to win the Supporters' Shield and who actually is going to make the playoffs out of the Eastern Conference, and all those 5 teams that's fighting for the last 2 spot, who exactly is going to get there in terms of the last 2 spot. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.